What if I told you that a pill could change your judgment of what is right and what is wrong? Or what if I told you that your sense of justice could depend on what you had for breakfast this morning? You're probably thinking by now, this sounds like science fiction, right? Neurons in the brain use chemicals called neurotransmitters to talk to each other. Here we have two neurons. The gap between them is called a synapse. To transmit a message across the synapse, this one neuron must release neurotransmitters into the synapse where they bind to receptors on the next neuron and propagate the message. The brain produces and releases these chemicals in response to various situations. My colleagues and I wanted to know whether manipulating people's brain chemistry could change the way they respond to moral situations. So in one study, we presented our volunteers with a moral dilemma like the following. There's a trolley. It's headed out of control down some tracks towards 5 workers who will die if you do nothing. However, you can stop the trolley by pushing a man carrying a heavy briefcase in front of the trolley onto the tracks, and he will die, but the 5 others will be saved. The question is it morally acceptable to harm this one person to save the others? And of course, there's no objectively correct answer to this question. In fact, there are 2 schools of moral thought that take opposing views. So the utilitarian school, rooted in the works of Jeremy Bentham, judges actions based on the outcomes they produce. So morally appropriate actions are those that result in the greatest good for the greatest number. On the other hand, the deontological school, grounded in the works of Immanuel Kant, judges the actions themselves. So there are right actions and wrong actions, and outcomes are irrelevant. In the dilemma I just described to you, utilitarians would say it's appropriate to push the man in front of the trolley because more lives are saved in the end, whereas deontologists would say it's inappropriate because harming is fundamentally wrong. My colleagues and I asked 30 volunteers to make judgments in a series of moral dilemmas like the one I described to you. We wanted to see whether we could change people's judgments of right and wrong by manipulating a particular brain chemical called serotonin. We used a drug called a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or SSRI. It's similar to the antidepressant Prozac and basically works by enhancing the effects of serotonin in the brain. On one session, our volunteers made moral judgments while on the influence of the SSRI. And on the other session, they made moral judgments while on a placebo pill. And here's what we found. On the placebo session, our volunteers said it was appropriate to harm one to save many others in about 40% of the cases that we described to them. And when we gave them the SSRI, they were significantly less likely to say it was acceptable to harm one to save many. In other words, the drug made them less utilitarian. Now, take a second just to think about these results. The debate between utilitarians and deontologists has been raging for hundreds of years. We gave people a single pill, and without even knowing it, they gave different answers to this question of whether or not it's okay to harm one to save many others. So could the difference between people like Bentham and people like Kant boil down to serotonin levels in their brains? And on a more serious note, what are the implications of this for other kinds of ethical questions?